Hello, everybody. Welcome to Wall Street Hackers, one of the most exciting and high-rated programs on the Pod TV network, which we discuss basically individual investing in the stock market. And with that, we'll go over the market because it's important if you're an investor to know what the market is doing. We also will look at the quotes of the week. We're going to look at stories of the week that take place in the market. And then we're going to have Peter's pick, what you should look at as a potential investment. And then afterwards, very small panel discussion because we're going to run out of time. And that's the Wall Street Hackers. But very helpful to figure out what you should be doing in this turbulent times in terms of investing. So with that, we're going to bring in the hacker himself, a person who graduated with an economics degree at UCLA, also a law degree at the University of Miami, and an MBA from NYU. After compiling a list of education, he went on and worked in Wall Street for 17 years, learning the ins and outs of what they're doing in investing. So with that, we're going to bring this bank of knowledge to you, this wealth of knowledge, the sea of knowledge, rather than drowning in the river of ignorance, no more than Peter Bennett. Peter, welcome to your show.
Very impressive. A little feeding my ego, I guess, but interesting take. So welcome to Wall Street Hackers 5924. You can catch a new edition each week based on what your distribution channel is, Thursdays at 1 or Saturdays, starting at that. So we always begin with the markets. And at the end of last week, the market was delighted. It jumped on the April employment numbers, and it's been very optimistic since then. The numbers said 175,000 payroll jobs were added. Only a few problems there. Number one, upwardly revised March additions were 315,000 additions. That dwarfs that. Number two, over the last 3 months, employers added 242,000 jobs on average, and 2.8 million jobs were added in the last 12 months. So the market's looking for any good news, and the problem is small data points don't necessarily do it. Finally, even if you believe that number was a sign, an analyst I heard on Bloomberg Radio was talking, and she made a really good point. She said that a lot of the decrease to 175,000 jobs added was because of a reduction in government employment. It wasn't the private sector, it was in government. So I'm not sure that's exactly the sign that inflation is subsiding. On the other side, Wall Street Hackers does believe now that the market is fairly valued. And for a long time, we didn't. And, we'll get into the performance of the market. I think we were more right than wrong, especially against inflation. But the thing is, I don't think inflation is under control by any means. Number one, it's certainly nowhere near the Fed's targets. Number two, rates are likely to stay higher for longer. I don't think the Fed will do much. I think they might cut politically or for whatever reasons, maybe a quarter point. I'd be surprised if half a point this year. But it's going to be a long, slow road in terms of fighting inflation. But why is it fairly valued? Because eventually interest rates are very likely to fall in our forecast. And that's the more important time frame. In the end, where are interest rates and inflation going? So our reasons are many. Number one, when inflation is high and unemployment is under 4%, the economy just doesn't change on a dime. It takes a long time. Number two, we believe that in the long run, the U.S. and the governments of the world are going to certainly, it's almost 100%, going to use what's called yield curve control, which is basically controlling long-term rates and bringing them down a lot by printing money, to bring rates down to zero or near zero. Now, our forecast maybe is 7 years from now we'll be hitting zero rates, But you're also going to hear about what Treasury rates have done historically in the last 40 years, and that also might convince you that we're heading for low rates very likely. Why is that? Medicare and Social Security liabilities and unfunded liabilities in the United States bring current U.S. debt, despite the $35.6 trillion that the media is always saying. I mean, you hardly ever hear any other number. They might talk about Medicare or Social Security separate, but you have to add those unfunded liabilities. The government was supposed to put that money aside. It's not put aside. Now they're talking about 10 years roughly till they're going bankrupt, both of these. But the problem is, if you look at the value of unfunded liabilities and the liabilities that are on the books, we're talking about 125 trillion today. That is the number they should be looking at, 125 trillion. And you say, oh, well, the United States doesn't want to, I don't want to be in the United States to invest. Other countries have exactly the same situation. I've looked in countries around the world, from Europe, Asia, South America. They all have underfunded retirement systems. And even worse, they're offering free health care, and they haven't put the money aside for these aging demographics. They say demographics is destiny. This is a perfect point where it may be destiny. So bottom line, the market should be okay, but I'm expecting lower returns for the next, maybe the rest of our lives, actually. I'm not saying negative returns against inflation, not as good a performance. And, especially not as well as it's done in the last 40 years, when the Treasury was lowering rates for 40 straight years into 2022. So now you might say, well, the market did do well, but let's look at the reality. These are hard numbers. In December 21, the SPY, the S&P 500 ETF, was at 471. This morning, it was at 516. We're talking about a 9.5% return over 2.5 years. That's 3.8% annually, roughly. Now, you'd say, okay, 3.8% isn't terrible, but one, is not a great return, certainly more than I would want, for a stock market investment where I was taking risk, and certainly how we perform better, but also against inflation that's been running about 6% over the last 3 years, you've actually lost money. So the media can keep saying, oh, we're at near new highs, we're 1% off the new high, and it's all a shell game in a sense, because the reality is the market hasn't been that strong, and I don't think it will be that strong. So what to do? Section 1, you want to be in the sectors and investments that will outperform during inflation and stagflation, because we're almost certainly heading for inflation and stagflation. I don't know what the inflation rate will be, but it'll be higher than a lot of returns and interest rates, because we're looking at negative interest rates down the road against inflation. Number 2, you want to be in dividend stocks, and that's true no matter what the environment, because our favorite chart, we talk about this all the time, and we show it sometimes, shows that for the 50 years to 2022, dividend stocks doubled the performance of the S&P 500, doubled, and dividend growth and initiators tripled the S&P 500 performance. We're talking about huge differences in performance in terms of putting in $100 gets you thousands, percent plus. Now, on the other side, non-dividend payers hardly got any return at all. I think it was like 6 times on non-dividend payers over 20 years, which sounds okay, but not for taking risk in the market. And finally, you want to be really selective on the businesses that you're going to be investing in, because in an inflationary environment and a stagflationary environment, many stocks will not do well, and it will put a lot of stress on the market, even if rates are coming down. So, quote of the week, this is from Barron's May 6th edition. It's selected quotes from that article. Don't be fooled. The Fed isn't the market's friend. The reality is there isn't enough evidence that the central bank is about to cut rates. On Wednesday, Fed Chairman Jerome Powell kept the Fed funds rate unchanged, and while he signaled that he would like to lower interest rates, conditions weren't right yet. The Fed just told you, quote, we're not hiking, but we don't have the confidence to cut yet. Exactly what we've been saying. I don't think we're going either way on interest rates this year, but this is going to present a large problem for the Fed. The Fed should have been ahead of the curve, and instead now they're at the curve or behind the curve. They need to get interest rates down because they need to get interest rates on the national debt down as soon as they can. So delays are not going to be good in the long run. 4 most interesting stories of the week. Number 1, this week, the judge in the Stormy Daniels case, Trump's case in New York, allowed Stormy Daniels to testify to every salacious detail of her one-night stand with Donald Trump yesterday. According to legal expert Jonathan Turley, this has absolutely no bearing on the guilt or innocence of the case. Democrats should be very aware of the Bubba polling effect. The trial harkens back to Bill Clinton's trial over the Monica Lewinsky affair. Many Americans dismissed it as just sex, and his favorability actually climbed to 71% after he was impeached for this matter. So the Democrats, for the years of the Clinton affair and the impeachment, were saying, this is just sex, this is just sex. Well, what is this trial about if it isn't just sex? And it isn't electoral interference. The point is that it's about him paying a non-disclosure agreement for to hide, or that he either had sex with her, which is probably likely, or that she was going to say such and he didn't want it to come out. But whatever it was, this is the most embarrassing and unconstitutional case in American history. First of all, you can't have a leading presidential candidate, and I say this whether it's Trump, if it was Biden, or even if it was socialist Bernie Sanders, you can't have him tied up during an election. That is, by definition, electoral interference. We're supposed to have separation of powers. The judicial is not supposed to be involved in an election of a president. That's the executive branch. Also, this is probably the most ridiculous case ever brought, maybe ever in the courts. Or I'm sure it's not the most ridiculous, but it's close. There are so many flaws with it. Number 1, non-disclosure agreements are legal. Number 2, at most it was a misdemeanor. Many federal authorities declined to prosecute it. The statute of limitations on this crime is over. It was 8 years ago. The judge is conflicted, extremely conflicted. His wife is a major donor, given major donations to the Democrat Party, and his daughter is a Democrat activist who raised funds for the daughter. He should have recused himself right away. Some of the rulings have been ridiculous. But 2 final points on this when we move on. 1, dirty politics is not necessarily right, not only for the country, but it may not be smart for the Democrat Party. A lot of people have figured out that this is not the right, it's not American. It's like a banana republic to have a candidate in office. It reminds me of Russia, where they tried and convicted Putin's rival, Navalny, who eventually died in prison, by the way, and banana republics, where they do things like this all the time. So it's ridiculous. Final footnote I just heard today, Stormy Daniels, who's one of the key witnesses, just said that she talks to the dead and she talks to dead relatives. Not to mention she's have a lot on her issues. And Michael Cohen, their star witness, is a repeated perjurer in both court and before Congress. Interesting story number 2. It was reported on May 5th, Russia has lost 1,000 soldiers 6 days in a row in the war in Ukraine. That brings total Russian deaths to nearly 500,000 troops since the invasion of Ukraine in just 2 years. 500,000 people, Russians alone. Russia is now actively recruiting women for the war and even extending the efforts into prisons to put prisoners to work. Desperate for troops, I guess. And it's a never-ending war to a point. And on the other side, Ukraine is also making more of an effort to track down draft invaders. So just a few points from Wall Street Hackers. 1, someone, an example, a U.S. president, should force a settlement in this war. Ukraine has vowed never to give up a foot of Ukrainian land. Not a foot. Russia needs and will never settle for less than at least a symbolic victory. So maybe something could be negotiated, but nothing's happening from the U.S. at all. And this is a prolonged struggle that is helping nobody in the world, basically, from the world economies to the peoples of those countries. We need somebody to negotiate. Interesting story number 3. The U.S. Navy has just tested a self-driving, fish-shaped drone submarine that can hibernate on the sea floor for very long periods without having to refuel, and then, unfortunately, deliver a wide array of payloads. It's dubbed the manta ray because it looks like a stingray or a manta ray, and it can anchor itself to the seafloor, and then it hibernates in very low power mode. It's also an automated drone. The Russians, by the way, have been also developing their own underwater drones, and last year announced plans to acquire at least 3 dozens of them. A little frightening. Finally, it would be almost humorous if it wasn't sad. And Nick, by the way, will appreciate this a lot because we were roommates and we went to law school together. We were actually roommates at the University of Miami. So interesting story number 4. Columbia law students want their school to cancel finals and pass all students because they're too shaken up after protests were broken up. So here's 2 points of view from New York Post letters. I didn't say them, but these selected quotes about the Columbia students who can't handle finals because they're too shaken up. Letter number 1, selections. I am both disappointed and ashamed that members of Columbia Law Review are too upset to take their finals. Without whining, most of my classmates were either coming home from or on their way to war when they were taking their finals. How times have changed. Probably obviously the Vietnam War. Letter number 2. What will they do at trial if a judge overrules several of their objections or denies their motions in chambers? And what if they're required to work 80 hours a week as a young associate at a new firm, which they will be? Good luck looking for safe spaces, sympathetic firm partners, and offers of employment from prestigious law firms. Bottom line, welcome to the real world. They will face it eventually. So we'll be discussing colleges a bit more in our panel discussion. Right now, we'll take a quick break and we'll talk about the investment of the week, and then we'll get into that discussion. See you soon.
One of the things that business owners forget a lot is to prepare for their own retirement.
Hi, my name's Nick Palavita, and today I'm with a very special guest, a certified financial planner, a chartered retirement plan specialist, and president of National Pension Partners, Max Culiet. Max, tell me what you do at National Pension Partners.
Well, Nick, we help successful small businesses and professionals put together retirement plans that provide them the maximum retirement benefits and big tax deductions at the same time.
Well, how do you do this?
Well, we get on an internet conferencing system with the client. We review their goals, what they want to accomplish, and then put together strategies to help them in implementing a retirement plan that benefits them, not everybody else.
Well, that sounds really good, but how much does this cost?
Well, it's really not bad because the first consultation is free. That allows us to go through and discover whether this strategy works for that business and for you as the business owner and helping you maximize your retirement.
Well, Max, how do we get this free appointment?
It's really pretty simple, Nick. You can either go to our website below or call us at 877-252-1692, and then we can set up a time with either myself, Nick, or one of our other retirement plan specialists, another CPA or advisor in the office, to go over this with you and make sure it fits for you.
Hi, my name is Lewis Haupt. I work with National Pension Partners, and I work with businesses to allow them to put the maximum away that they can for themselves and to save taxes.
Hi, I'm Brad Coyle, and I'm the brokerage manager at National Pension Partners. We're always analyzing plan fund choices in order to ensure the participant's success.
If you want more information on how we can help you and your business put more money away in a retirement plan than you ever thought possible, contact us at the website below or call us at 877-252.
So the income investment of the week, which will be a little different. Disclaimer first, as always, this show is for entertainment only. It's only our opinions. There's no guarantees on any of our ideas, and there never is really guarantees except for treasuries, which we're going to be discussing, but even those aren't guaranteed against fluctuations in principal and in price, and also so consult your financial advisor. And this week will be different because normally we're always talking about REITs or MLPs, stocks. But this is different because we're going to talk about long-term treasuries. Last week, we discussed in detail why I decided to sell muni bonds. And it was basically two things. One, muni bonds, like I like, which are general obligation, full state muni bonds, are really offering low yields now. It seems like there's just a lot of competition from them, probably from mutual funds. And so right now you can get maybe a 3% to call, somewhere around there. And those are still state taxable unless it's your own state. So, but the big thing was the call features themselves. And I started thinking, well, look, if these states have call features, let's say I'm just making it up. Let's say it's a 2040 bond, but they have a call feature in 2030. Well, if interest rates go really low, you're going to have to reinvest in 2030, and there won't be very good options in terms of fixed income. But if interest rates go really high, you'll be stuck to 2040. So forget it. If I can get a 4.7, roughly the equivalent or better in a treasury, why not? So we're going to be discussing long-term treasuries. We're talking about potentially 20 or 30 years. And one more disclaimer, I don't know whether this is a great idea or not. I mean, even more so, when I look at a business and I see this is a solid business, good yields, good dividend, I'm pretty confident. Here, I can't predict interest rates with any certainty because nobody can with certainty. So maybe inflation will drive rates much higher, like in the 70s. Maybe it'll drive it low. But this, I believe that it's very important to have part of your portfolio in fixed income. I like keeping it in long-term anchored investments that are very safe because I want to take my risk with equity or REITs and investments like that. So an interesting study from JP Morgan showed that I just saw recently that in the 20 years from 1999 to 2018, the S&P returned 5.6%, but a 60-40 bond portfolio returned 5.2%, and even a 60% bond portfolio got 5%. So you're losing a huge amount percentage-wise year by year. It does accumulate to a reasonable amount, but if you go with a mixed bond portfolio, but you are adding a lot of safety, obviously, to that, and that's very important too. Not to mention that the average investor very often in stocks sells at the wrong times and winds up with a much lower return. So the question is whether to take long-term rate, lock-ins on these kind of rates. Let's look quickly at the 20-year, the history of the 20-year Treasury bond. And it's very interesting. I didn't realize it until today, and I looked at it for the show. So in 2000, the rate was 6.9%. I'm going to round everything off. In 2010, it dropped to 4.6%. By 2012, it was 2.6%. Then from 2012 to 2020, it stayed around 2.5%. It was 2.05% in 122. So for 10 straight years, you could only get 2.5% in the Treasury. And also the other thing in the pattern is for 40 straight years, the rate has dropped until COVID. So it was a straight line heading down. So now in 23, it suddenly dropped to 4%, and now you get about 4.7%. Will that stay? Well, my guess is eventually rates are coming down. The governments of the world are going to need rates to come down in order to pay, to avoid paying interest on their debt. So there's going to be a lot of power towards yield curve control and keeping these rates down. If rates drop, then this is a good idea to lock it in. I did a few other points. Ideally, treasuries are held in a Roth IRA or an IRA or a 401k qualified plan. But even if you buy U.S. treasuries in a non-qualified plan, that's non-IRA, non-401k, you're still state tax free. So it's not a bad yield compared to a muni, even depending on your tax bracket. Also, we suggest very strongly high coupon bonds. I like high coupon bonds. Maybe get 3.75 or 4% coupons. And of course, your yield to maturity is going to be higher. But the thing is, by getting a very high coupon, your really win either way, because if rates come down, then you've locked in very good income. If rates go up, at least you have a high stream of income, and you can then buy more bonds or other investments, which will be doing well, I suppose, at that rate. So either way, you know, locking in a high coupon is important. So there's no guarantees, but bottom line, between government debt, aging populations, the move against globalization, geopolitics, and other issues, and inflation and stagflation, which may be here for a long time, the market itself may not perform that well. And so bonds may be a really safe place to be. And I don't mind making a bet with some of portfolio on them, again, depending on your risk. So panel discussion of the week, we actually have 4 minutes instead of our usual 2. Question is, what is going on? Hey, Nick. So question is, what is going on with U.S. colleges and what can be done about it? Quick background. First of all, almost everybody knows there's riots, and hey, Kim, everybody knows there's been a lot of riots and stress at the colleges. Some of these have been violent. There was even boldly anti-Semitic messages like swastikas at least a few. So that's one point, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about colleges in general. Vigorous protests are not new to college campuses, as we know. Tuitions are sky high and have greatly exceeded the CPI over the years. Many colleges have done away with standardized tests now, but there's now a movement for some like Yale and Brown to bring them back. But they think, oh, we'll just let people in based on whatever we want. And very importantly, many colleges, students are now seeming indoctrinated or at least blatantly ignorant on world issues. And a lot of them are taking Marxist or neo-Marxist narratives. Obviously, the fault lies in the messages of at least some of the professors and administrators who are either
to address that letter from Columbia. Shame on them. They won't be able to handle the real world, so they shouldn't be able to be passed. But let's talk about this. I think that the universities are, well, first off, monkey see, monkey do, right? Your leaders have set the pace and the ethics that we're following, January 7th being one of them. You know what? You don't like what you see? You go destroy the White House. You go destroy your university's president's house. I don't know. But they see the leaders doing this. They see them getting away with it. So, of course, they're going to behave this way. And as for, the cost of education is just ridiculous. It does not need to be this high. I agree with Nick. He had mentioned this earlier. Let's cut the chancellors and the heads checks and distribute it among the teachers, reduce the cost of education greatly, and it will come back. It will come back to them.
But right, Nick, you have to go. We have to let Nick go. So unfortunately,
the thing that I get.
Good comment, Kim. Go ahead.
Very, very interesting. The judges are not going to hire people from Columbia University. Because they said that this university is out of control, which I agree. But we're going to add another university that's out of control. It's called Northwestern. In response to this protest, they gave 5 scholarships to Palestinians and 2 faculty positions. Now, what's the metric? Do you have to be a high scholar? Do you have to have good research? Do you have to have good grades? No. All you have to do is be a Palestinian, and then you get a scholarship, which is a horrible metric. It's a horrible, I'm going to hire some faculty. It's a horrible decision by Northwestern. So for my grandkids, I cross off Northwestern as a university to send them to. And I think everybody else.
Also good, Nick. I'll start. We're going to have to continue this again. There's no way we can make the time limit on the show within half an hour. So I'll just start giving my conclusions. Number one, universities are fat and lazy. Why? Because the government is subsidized through loans and grants and tax advantages. They've gotten so rich that they have tenured professors. They have spend money on buildings. They don't have any priorities in cost benefit analysis, and we're out of the time. So we will continue this next week. As Kim always says, and she's here today, get healthy and get wealthy, and we'll see you next week. See you soon. Bye.
Okay. Okay, Wall Street Hackers. I got to move to the other one.
Got it.
Okay.
We'll
We're
keep talking.